Imagine a small old wooden house. Outside, snow is falling in the quiet dark. There's a light wind. A single lantern glows on the front porch. Inside, the light is soft and warm. A fireplace crackles. A rocking chair stands nearby. On the table, there are old worn cookbooks. Now, imagine a quiet voice telling you this story softly, not to wake the children who have fallen asleep after a long winter day. Let's open one of those old books together, or rather, not even a book, a notebook. Its cover is worn and faded, the pages are yellowed, and on the very first page, written neatly in ink, there is a simple line. Christmas, 1889. Recipes for Home. Today, I want to open that notebook with you, and through its pages, visit people who lived in America 100 to 150 years ago. People who blew out candles on their Christmas trees, who heard snow crunch under the hooves of horses, who put on their Christmas tables sweet things we have almost completely forgotten. Back then, Christmas in America wasn't the bright, noisy, glittering supermarket holiday we see today. It was quieter, more intimate, more homebound, with a smell of wood, of coal, of candle wax, and of some very special desserts. Let's go back to the late 19th century. Picture an ordinary wooden house somewhere in Ohio or Pennsylvania. Outside, the air is icy. Frost patterns lace the glass on the windows. Inside, the heart of the house is the kitchen. This is the center of the home's universe. It's not just where people cook, it's where they celebrate. In those years, Christmas in America was only just becoming a truly national holiday. In some Puritan communities of New England, people still remembered times when Christmas was not recognized at all, when it was considered a popish or Catholic invention. In Boston, Christmas was officially just another workday well into the second half of the 19th century. Children might be excused from school, but adults still went to work. And yet, by then, newspapers were already printing Christmas stories, publishing poems, and, most important for us, sharing special recipes for the holiday. In December, issues of small local papers, next to advertisements for coal, for firewood, for good strong horses, you could often find a little paragraph with a headline like, "A good Christmas pudding for a modest family," or "Old Virginia Christmas Cake." In these short, homely columns, squeezed between ads and local news, the sweet history of American Christmas was quietly hiding. Now I want you to imagine something very simple. The morning of December 24th, 1875. A farm family in Iowa. The mother opens a cupboard and takes out a small cloth bag of sugar. She has been saving this sugar almost the entire month. The children gather around watching as she pours the white crystals onto a big, heavy scale. For them, it's like watching a little performance. They know that very soon those crystals will turn into something magical. One of those small Christmas miracles was vinegar pie. To our modern ears, vinegar pie can sound almost shocking. How can you make a dessert with vinegar? But at that time, this pie was normal, beloved, and most importantly, affordable. It created the illusion of a lemon or fruit pie in places where real lemons or fresh fruit were almost impossible to get. The crust was as simple as it could be. Flour, a little lard or butter, water. The filling was where the magic happened. Into boiling water, the cook would add sugar, a bit of vinegar, some flour or starch to thicken it, and a pinch of spice. Cinnamon, nutmeg. The mixture became thick, slightly tart, and very aromatic. When it cooled inside a crisp, flaky crust, the taste was surprisingly close to a fruit pie, especially if you had never in your life tried a real lemon tart. Newspapers in the early 1880s sometimes printed lines like this: "For those living far from the coasts, where lemons are dear, a good vinegar pie will bring just as much cheer to the Christmas table." Today, vinegar pie is almost forgotten. You might see it now and then in a historical reenactment or in a TV show about hard times cooking, but for the families of that era, it was not a symbol of poverty. It was a symbol of resourcefulness, of everyday ingenuity, of homemade magic. America, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, was a huge pot of cultures bubbling together. German immigrants brought their stollen and their gingerbread. Swedes brought fragrant cardamom buns. The English brought dense Christmas puddings. The Irish brought rich fruitcakes. African-American families in the South brought their own versions of Christmas cakes made with molasses and spices. Imagine a small town in Pennsylvania. On one street, you might find a German-American family, an Irish family, and a formerly enslaved woman who had recently moved north from the South. Each woman carried with her a deeply rooted taste of Christmas. And in those kitchens where traditions met and mixed, forgotten desserts were born, hybrids, reinterpretations, gentle compromises. In one house, they might bake German Christmas cookies from a great-grandmother's recipe from Hamburg, but instead of expensive almonds, they would use cheaper local nuts. Next door, another family might adapt the same idea completely differently, replacing honey with molasses or sorghum syrup and adding a bit of cornmeal. The result was a unique kind of cookie or cake that might exist in just one household. It never appeared in printed cookbooks. It lived only in a family notebook and in memory. Food historians once found an old recipe from Illinois from the late 19th century. On the top, someone had written, "Christmas cake, Grandma's way, not from the book." There was not a single precise measurement, just notes like a bit of molasses, enough flour so the dough will not stick to your hands, nuts, as many as you please. That Christmas cake existed only in that one kitchen, and so most likely it disappeared quietly when the chain of passing it down broke. From grandmother to mother to daughter to granddaughter. Now let's move to Virginia. It's the 1870s. It's the middle of November. Imagine opening the door of a house there. One smell would meet you right away. A thick, almost heavy scent of spices, alcohol, and dried fruit. That would mean the family was already making their Christmas fruitcake. But this was not the somewhat dry, slightly sad fruitcake in a bright box that so often appears as a joke in modern films. Back then, this cake was the center of the year's desserts, the most anticipated sweet of all. People began making it weeks, sometimes even months, before Christmas. Dried raisins, candied fruit. In some homes, pieces of expensive candied pineapple, nuts, honey, or molasses. All these went into a large bowl and were soaked in rum, brandy, or bourbon. In wealthier homes, there might be imported Caribbean rum. In more modest families, they used homemade apple brandy, Applejack. In December of 1868, the New York Herald advised young housewives, "A Christmas cake should not be hurried. Give it time to mature like a good friendship." Sometimes these cakes were kept for months, carefully wrapped in paper. Now and then, sprinkled with a spoonful of alcohol so they would not dry out. In old diaries, you can find notes about young women who, on the day of their engagement, would bake a small fruitcake. Then they would hide it away, planning to bring it out and share it for their first Christmas together as husband and wife. Today, fruitcakes have not completely disappeared, but their old, almost ritual role is mostly gone. We buy them already made, often from a factory line. We may not know that long ago in some southern states, there was a little Christmas tradition, almost like a playful spell. If a girl ate a piece of fruitcake on Christmas Eve and put a slip of paper with the name of the man she loved under her pillow, she was supposed to see him in her dreams. These small, half-serious, half-playful traditions grew precisely around homemade desserts. People trusted these foods not just with joy and taste, they trusted them with their wishes. By the end of the 19th century, America was changing fast. Cities were growing, factories were multiplying, railroads were stretching across the country. People were leaving farms and small towns and moving into crowded city neighborhoods. Kitchens were shrinking. Instead of a big hearth and open space, families now had tiny stoves and cramped apartments. But the desire to celebrate Christmas did not disappear. In these new conditions, special compromise desserts appeared. You've already heard about one of them, vinegar pie. Another was the so-called mock mince pie. The original English mince pie once contained actual meat, mixed with dried fruit and spices. In America, the meat started disappearing earlier than in England. First it became just a trace in the recipe. Then it vanished almost completely. In poor families, cooks pushed the idea even further. They invented clever imitation versions. When there wasn't enough meat or enough good fruit, housewives began improvising. They used grated carrots, pieces of apple peel, a dash of vinegar, molasses, chopped unripe fruit, anything that could create a deep, layered flavor. In a little pamphlet from Ohio, printed in the 1890s, historians found a recipe for a minimum mince pie. There was no meat, almost no expensive fruit, very little white sugar. But there was a lot of imagination. Another forgotten type of Christmas sweet consisted of simple, modest desserts like drop cakes and cup custards. They were made for people who could not afford a big, grand pie. Drop cakes were tiny little cakes made by dropping spoonfuls of thick batter onto a baking sheet. That's where their name came from. Into the batter they put whatever they had: a spoon of molasses, a small handful of raisins, a pinch of cinnamon. On Christmas, these slightly dry but warm and fragrant little cakes brought as much happiness to children in poor neighborhoods as grand layer cakes did to children in mansions. Cup custard was baked custard served in small cups or molds, milk, an egg, a bit of sugar, a hint of vanilla if you were lucky. It felt luxurious, although the ingredients themselves were very simple. These custards were often baked right in the cast-iron oven, sometimes in old tin cups that had seen many winters. Today, desserts like these have almost disappeared, not because they were bad, but because they are too quiet, too modest. In an age of bright packaging and complex fillings, few people remember a simple warm custard in a dented metal mug. Yet for a dock worker's child, in a cold rented room near the harbor, that custard might have been the only Christmas sweet of the year. At the very end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, another small revolution took place in American desserts. It was all because of gelatin. Before powdered gelatin was widely available, All kinds of molded jellies, both savory and sweet, were difficult and time-consuming. Cooks had to simmer bones for a long time, extract the collagen, strain it carefully, and hope it would set. But in the 1890s, and especially in the early 1900s, mass-produced gelatin changed everything. Jelly desserts became modern, almost futuristic. Colorful advertisements appeared, early versions of what later became famous brands like Jell-O. And exactly at the point where old Christmas traditions met new food technology, a new holiday fashion appeared: Christmas jelly desserts. In ladies' magazines of the time, in Ladies' Home Journal, in Good Housekeeping, you could read advice like, "For a modern Christmas table, serve a molded cranberry jelly with floating fruits." Hostesses made these jellies in the shapes of wreaths, stars, bells. Sometimes they even created whole little Christmas scenes out of them. Inside the transparent red or golden jelly, you could see slices of orange, grapes, pieces of pineapple, even little marshmallows. On Christmas tables in the 1910s and 1920s, such desserts looked almost like glass sculptures. In a December 1912 issue of the Boston Globe, you can find a description of a Christmas banquet. The main centerpiece of the table was something called a Christmas jelly pyramid, a tall layered tower of jellies in different colors topped with a tiny angel figurine. But time moved on. Jelly gradually started to seem cheaper, more ordinary. It became associated with quick, simple, even childish desserts. Then came the 1950s and 60s, with their love of convenience foods. Strange recipes bloomed in magazines: salads made from sweet gelatin mixed with vegetables, or even with meats. Gelatin dishes became part of a mid-century cooking style that today many people look at with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. In that wave, the elegant Christmas jellies of the early 20th century, with cranberries, grapes, spices, and citrus, quietly disappeared from most homes, though once they had been the very symbol of a modern Christmas. Today, when many people say American Christmas cookies, they picture bright sugar cookies cut into the shapes of trees, snowflakes, and reindeer covered with colorful icing. But 100 to 150 years ago, the typical cookies for Christmas looked very different. One of the most important was gingerbread, and it wasn't always about little gingerbread men. Often gingerbread was baked in large sheets, then cut into shapes: houses, horses, birds, ships. In Pennsylvania, especially in areas with many German settlers, people liked to bake big gingerbread hearts for Christmas. They decorated them with nuts, sometimes with bits of colored sugar. An old description of a Christmas fair in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, from 1883 says, "Children crowded around the gingerbread stand where great hearts and horses dusted with sugar hung from bright ribbons." These gingerbreads were dense and dark. They were full of molasses, dark sugar, and generous spice. They could be stored for weeks. Children might carry a gingerbread heart with them to school, taking small bites during the day. Over time, industrial baking changed the flavor. Molasses was replaced by cheaper, more neutral white sugar. Spices were used more sparingly because they cost more. In the 20th century, bright sugar cutout cookies with colored icing came to dominate the holiday table. Old-style gingerbread survived only in a few regions, or as a souvenir for tourists. In some Pennsylvania towns today, you can still find families who bake gingerbread from their great-grandmother's recipes. They will often tell you, with a smile and a shrug, Our grandchildren don't really like it. They say it's too spicy. Children who grow up on soft, mild factory sweets are often not ready for the sharp, rich, complex taste that 100 years ago meant, this is Christmas. There is another category of Christmas sweets that has almost disappeared from everyday life. Homemade candies, not chocolate bars in shiny foil, not boxed assortments from a big brand, but candies made at home, from sugar, cream, nuts, and a lot of patience. One of these treats was pulled molasses candy. Imagine a family gathering in the evening when all the day's work is finally done. It isn't just cooking, it's a ritual. Molasses, sugar, and water are boiled together until the mixture becomes thick and dark. Then, while it is still very hot, it is poured onto greased trays to cool just enough to handle. That is when the real fun begins. An adult picks up a lump of the warm candy mass with greased hands and begins to pull it, stretching it out, folding it back, stretching again, folding again. Soon, older children join in. With every pull, the candy grows lighter in color, air is beaten into it. The texture becomes more delicate and brittle. In the end, the long ropes of candy are cut into short pieces. They shine like little bars of amber or gold. Children usually burn their fingers a little, but they never want to step away from the table. They are allowed to help, and that matters as much as the candy itself. In some families, people said, whoever makes the smoothest candy will be the luckiest in the new year. In Christmas issues of late 19th century newspapers, you can almost always find at least one note about such candy pulls. Sometimes there was even a warning. Do not attempt molasses pulling with very young children around. Hot sugar is unforgiving. Another beloved tradition, especially in the early 20th century, was a candy called divinity. These were soft, snow-white candies made from whipped egg whites, sugar, and nuts. Divinity became especially popular in the Midwest and in the South. Its pure white color felt symbolic, like snow, especially precious in places that rarely saw a white Christmas. Today, homemade candies like these demand time, skill, and attention. It is far easier to buy a box of chocolates in a store. And so slowly, the big household plates covered with homemade caramels, nut clusters, taffies, and pulled molasses, candy disappeared from everyday Christmas life. But once, for many families, that candy plate on the table was as essential as the Christmas tree in the corner. Now, let's travel farther south, to the Carolinas, to Georgia. If we listen to the memories of older people there, we might hear about something called Christmas black cake. Its roots run deep into British fruitcake traditions and into Caribbean black cake, which in turn reflects African and European influences. Unlike the lighter fruitcakes of the North, Southern black cake was truly dark, almost black. It got its color not just from molasses and dark sugar. Raisins and other dried fruits were soaked for weeks, sometimes months, in rum or brandy. Cooks added burnt sugar syrup, sugar cooked until it turned nearly black, to deepen the color and flavor even more. An old note in a South Carolina newspaper around the turn of the 20th century says, in many colored families, the Christmas black cake is begun as early as September. The longer the fruits sit in rum, the more the angels bless it, as grandmothers say. This dessert was not just something sweet at the end of the meal. It was a family event, a link between the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, and America. Every ingredient carried a piece of history, of travel, of trade, of forced migration, of survival. But at Christmas, that heavy history was transformed into something joyful, fragrant, and festive. Later, as lighter, faster, cheaper sweets came to dominate the American market, desserts like black cake faded away from many tables. They are still made in some families, passed down as a cherished ritual, but they are no longer so common that every child knows their taste. Yet once, the smell of rum, spice, and burnt sugar syrup was as much a part of Christmas in many Southern homes as the sound of hymns in church. By the middle of the 20th century, America looked nothing like it had in 1880 or 1900. Cars filled the streets. Cities stretched further and further. Refrigerators hummed in kitchens. Ready-made foods and baking mixes appeared on shelves. Television glowed in living rooms. And slowly, almost invisibly, Christmas began to move. It moved out of small, smoky kitchens, out of neighborhood bakeries, and into supermarkets, advertising jingles, and glossy magazine spreads. On store shelves, you could suddenly find ready-made cakes in boxes, cake mixes with bright pictures, frostings in cans, instant puddings, and quick desserts. On the one hand, this opened new possibilities. A woman who worked all day could still put a dessert on the table. A tired family could still have something sweet after dinner. On the other hand, there were fewer reasons for the whole family to gather around the table, to spend 2 hours pulling molasses candy or taking turns stirring a heavy fruit batter in a giant bowl. By the 1950s, many American children had already never heard of vinegar pie. They had never seen a homemade jelly wreath. They dreamed, instead of brightly packaged chocolate bars and frosted layer cakes from commercials, where large tins of Grandma's homemade cookies had once stood in the pantry, store-bought boxes now took their place. Some traditions did survive, but they changed in character. Christmas sugar cookies, cut into the shapes of trees and stars, grew out of the old habit of baking shaped cookies. But they became brighter, covered with artificial colorings and thick icing. Their flavor became softer, more neutral, a taste that everybody could accept and nobody would argue about. The cult of decoration and icing took off, sometimes at the expense of taste itself. Meanwhile, many of the quiet desserts, cup custard, simple drop cakes, tart vinegar pies, hand-written meatless mince pies, pulled molasses candy, almost vanished. Their place was taken by global standardized flavors, chocolate, vanilla, caramel, in familiar mass-produced forms. We know about many of these forgotten desserts not from beautiful cookbooks, but from accidental sources. From a tiny note in a local newspaper. Mrs. Allen gave her famous vinegar pie for the church Christmas supper. From a soldier's letter written from the front during the First World War, I dream of home and Ma's Christmas custard cups with nutmeg on top. From early 20th century Christmas postcards that included a short line like, May your home be full of laughter and the smell of fresh gingerbread. In some cookware catalogs from the 1910s, you can even find drawings of jelly molds shaped like angels or Christmas bells, with a tiny recipe underneath explaining how to make them at home. These fragments were never meant to be history, but today they are treasures for anyone who wants to revive lost traditions. They remind us that many things we consider old classics are actually quite recent, and many things that were once the everyday Christmas reality for millions of families have faded away, leaving nothing behind but a single line like, "The children enjoyed the molasses candy pulling as much as their gifts." So why did these desserts nearly disappear? Part of the reason is urbanization and the speeding up of life. Few people today have time to boil molasses to the right stage, or wait a month and a half for a cake to mature, or carefully cut out gingerbread horses by hand. Another part is changing tastes. Generations raised on softer, sweeter, factory-made treats began to see spicy, tangy, dense, old-fashioned sweets as too heavy, too strange. Fruitcake became a punchline. Vinegar pie became a food of poverty. Molasses gave way to white sugar and corn syrup. And then there is mass food production and advertising. They created a new idea of a normal holiday table, where each family once had its own unique Christmas dessert. Now many families have roughly the same set of treats, bought from the same stores. And yet, not everything is lost. In recent decades, interest in heritage cooking has been growing in the United States. People search for old family notebooks. They browse newspaper archives. They reconstruct recipes from diaries. You can now find blogs and books where someone writes about the first time they baked a vinegar pie using their great-great-grandmother's recipe from Nebraska, and how stunned they were by how delicious it turned out. In some small towns, Christmas markets include historical tastings. You can try a fruitcake made from an 1850 recipe, hot cup custards sprinkled with nutmeg, molasses taffy cooked right there in a cast-iron pot over a fire. This is more than just food. It's a way to feel connected to those who lived before us, to sense how Christmas smelled in a home without electricity, where the only light came from a kerosene lamp, and the only refrigerator was a slightly opened window on a freezing night. So let's go back one more time to that small old house in our imagination. On the shelf in the kitchen stands a yellowed notebook labeled Christmas 1889. We turn the pages and see familiar and unfamiliar words: molasses candy, vinegar pie, Christmas black cake, cup custard, gingerbread hearts. Somewhere in the margin, a hand has written, "Add another spoon of molasses. Last year, it was too dry." Next to it, in a different, smaller hand, is a child's clumsy writing. A first name squeezed to the corner of the cookie recipe page. Maybe that is the very cookie this child will later bake with their own children, or maybe not. Life will spin on, times will change, and the recipe may be lost. And yet, as soon as someone takes out this notebook, turns on the oven, and mixes a little sugar, flour, spice, and patience, time begins to fold in on itself. In the smell of the batter, you feel not only your own home, but homes that no longer exist. Tables around which large families once gathered, voices, laughter, a whisper as someone breaks off a still warm piece of crust from a pie just pulled out of the oven. Maybe the real value of forgotten Christmas desserts is not in bringing them back to every table. Maybe it's in reminding us that a holiday is not only what is sold in bright packaging. It is also what someone once made by hand, slowly, patiently, hoping that this particular pie, these particular candies, would make the evening special. If, this year, while getting ready for the holidays, you decide to bake something not from a box, but from an old-style recipe, even one you found online, inspired by forgotten traditions, you will become part of a very long chain of people. People who believe that a small piece of sweetness on a plate can warm not just the stomach, but the heart. And perhaps many years from now, someone will open your own notebook. They will see, on a slightly yellowed page, Christmas cake, our way, not from the book. They will smile and say, I'll bake this for my family, just to find out what Christmas smelled like back then by the fire in the far-off 21st century. And maybe, just for one evening, that smell, a mixture of spice, molasses, fruit, caramel, and a hint of vinegar, will once again fill a quiet house. Outside, snow will be falling. Somewhere, a lantern will glow on a porch. A fire will crackle. And the taste of Christmas, the old taste, the almost forgotten one, will return for a little while to someone's table.